Truthful and True podcast. We are here today with special guests. We have two of them today, Greg.
Yes.
Greg, as usual, Dr. Greg Miller is, of course, the host of our podcast. But we have Elizabeth Griffin and David Delmonico. I'm going to let Elizabeth, because you're so used to working with David, give our listeners and viewers an introduction of yourself and David.
Okay, well, I'm going to let David do his own introduction, and because we always start with him going first. David, I'm going to let you go first.
and we have David on the phone, by the way, yeah.
Well, it's great to be here with you today. My name is David Delmonico. I'm a professor at Duquesne University, which is located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And, I've been doing work with individuals who struggle with their sexual behavior for probably close to 30 years now. And, we've really focused the last parts of our career, the last maybe 15 to 20 years, on how people get themselves into trouble with their online behavior. And in particular, sometimes when it comes to issues of illegal behavior where there are some significant consequences as a result. So I'm looking forward to talking to everybody today about this, what I think is a really important issue.
Mm-hmm.
So David always tries to make us younger than we are. It's actually been closer to 25 years that we've been specializing in problematic online sexual behavior, both cybersex addiction as well as illegal online sexual behavior. And David and I met many years ago when we both worked for Dr. Patrick Carnes, and it was at that time that we both met Mark Laser. And that would have been how many years ago, David? Like a lot.
A lot of years.
A lot of years ago.
I recall you were in junior high.
In junior high, right. I know people find it hard to believe I'm that old. So anyway, David and I both met Mark around the same time when we were working with Pat Carnes around various aspects of the sex addiction world.
Yeah, and as you kind of indicated, that the topic that we're going to be discussing is this idea of navigating the legal realities of sex addiction when you begin to cross certain lines and the law begins to get involved. And what's true is we have clients that's part of their story, that they are brought to us and there is some sort of legal implications to their choices. And so we are very glad that y'all are here to talk about it and to just give us some coaching on how to support and encourage men that this may be part of their story. And so just to begin with, what are some basic principles that are helpful for someone to understand when they have been involved in something and now the law is involved?
Well, I think to start with, it's important to understand that if you look at enough adult pornography in the online world, you're going to find child pornography. Mm-hmm. And child pornography legally is defined as anyone under the age of 18. Mm-hmm. So it can certainly be someone that looks like an adult, but is actually 16, 17 years old. And I think that what David and I have found is that people often think, well, it's online, there are no consequences to this behavior, no one will ever know. And while they may not be sexually interested or attracted to children, they start to cross those boundaries almost without any conscious thought mm-hmm. of what they're actually doing. So, David, what would you add to that?
Well, I think just like we talked about, just like you were mentioning, Elizabeth, the escalation that we sometimes see is also really important to pay attention to. Most of the guys that we talk to talk about, looking at adult pornography, and maybe that's their story, that's their struggle. But what they find then is the internet begins to open up other avenues and doors that they didn't expect. And they begin maybe looking at certain fetishes online or certain types of pornography, and that eventually escalates into looking at Lolita sites or looking at kind of under barely legal sites, and that escalation, like other addictions, we often see people escalate their addictive behaviors. That escalation can often end in the viewing of child pornography. And a lot of guys will say, I don't even know how I got here. Mm-hmm. They'll sit across from us and just say, I didn't expect this. This wasn't something I planned. I don't even know how I got into this world, and here I am, maybe sitting in a counselor's office, or even worse, an attorney or a law enforcement office, trying for them to try to understand how they even got to the child pornography to begin with.
So in your own thinking, would you distinguish between someone who is interested in underage pornography versus someone who is curious? Now, they may end up at the very same place, whether their interests are there or their curiosity is there, but is it helpful or important for you to make that distinction when you're working with someone?
I would say that is like one of the first things we try to do, because the intervention is going to be slightly different for each of those groups. And that for some people, it is about having that interest in underage individuals, and maybe that they haven't even been able to realize or admit to themselves that they see an image and there's something about that image that really sparks their interest. And a lot of men I see often have had a pivotal sexual experience. Let's say so many men I work with here, they were like 12 years old, and they had this pivotal sexual experience, perhaps with a young girl who was 10, 11, 12 years old. And there was something about that experience at that time of their sexual development that really imprinted.
Right.
And then, but maybe they go on, they have their own struggles with adult pornography, but then they see an image online that triggers that old experience.
That 12-year-old girl.
That 12-year-old girl. And then it is so hard to delineate, because it's not so much maybe a sexual interest, though it can have a flavor of that, but it's a curiosity, a fascination. And, prior to technology, 35 years ago when I started in this field, if someone was caught viewing child pornography or possessing child pornography, you knew without a doubt that they had a strong sexual interest in children. Technology changed all that for the worse,
right? Yes.
Because it's so easy to find. And so now we have a number of people that would never have looked at child pornography if it hadn't have been for the internet, and maybe either that escalation that David talked about, or a past trauma, being sexually abused themselves. We did a webinar yesterday, and David said, for a lot of men, they often are looking at ages of children at the same age when they were sexually abused, as a way to that trauma repetition or that trauma resolution. So it's a complicated issue to tease out. What is this really about?
Right.
Yeah. David, what would you add to that?
Well, I think the word curiosity is underused in our world, because I think that we all have an innate curiosity, and especially when it comes to sexuality, we're always kind of wondering about, what's on the other side. And kind of a non-sexual example I use a lot is when you're traveling down the highway and there's a car accident on the other side of the center barrier, and everybody on your side is slowing down to look and see what's happening over there. And so, I don't think that we want to see, someone splayed out or dead laying on the road, but there is something about our innate curiosity that makes us want to look over there to see what's happening. And I think using that metaphor, sometimes that's what happens on the internet. For guys who are into looking at maybe adult pornography, or maybe not even pornography at all, but somehow stumble upon child pornography, it becomes this curiosity where I can't look away. And then when they do take that look, like Elizabeth said, you can pick up with her, it triggers something for them, whether that's their own traumatic experience or early child sexual experience, or just kind of triggers that addiction, almost like the first drink with an alcoholic might take, that those kind of curiosities, which we think are kind of apparently irrelevant decisions that we make, end up being very relevant decisions in kind of the way the course of our viewing pornography might might proceed.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we teach at the workshop is this idea of curiosity. There's nothing wrong with that. God created us to be curious. And in fact, that curiosity is what can draw us towards God as we pursue God. And so whenever we're exposed to something new, it awakens that curiosity. So it's not about denying curiosity, it's about stewarding curiosity.
Right.
And we teach that when children are introduced to sex, there's typically two things that happen. They become curious about sex, and then they begin to internalize the shame that they're experiencing because of the uncertainty of what is happening or what to do with what is occurring in their bodies. And so that combination of curiosity and shame creates a lot of chaos. And so therefore it makes sense as adults, some of those same factors of shame and curiosity are playing out.
That's right, yeah.
And
I think we have, I just wanted to add something in there about, I think we've had the experience where we've worked with men who maybe have, found themselves into this cycle of viewing child pornography, and when we put some things in place, we start getting some treatment, and maybe we negotiate some abstinence from the internet for a period of time, that their interest or their curiosity about children tends to dissipate and go away. And that's not the way that we used to think about, children and sexuality. We thought, well, if somebody was interested in children, it was a lifelong interest that they would always have, and we'd never be able to change that. But the internet changes that because we're getting so many different types of people viewing child pornography that when we take that away from them, all of a sudden they begin to have some clarity about it, and really the drive or the interest is not there anymore.
I think the other factor that nobody really talks about nearly as much as we should is the psychology of technology. And it is an entire new field of study that really talks about that when we get into the online world, we all have the propensity to say and do things that we would never say in the offline world. So when somebody sends out a tweet that is very shaming of someone, like that's that online disinhibition, that the anonymity or the feeling of being anonymous. Right. We're really not, but the feeling of being anonymous really encourages us to just think this is a world we can say or do anything or look at anything, and there are no consequences.
I think that's what has led to a lot of cyberbullying,
right,
as well, is
exactly.
because people think that they're anonymous. They can say whatever crosses their mind and not worry about consequences.
Right. And so when you combine maybe someone's shame or early trauma or, other factors with the online disinhibition, or someone who maybe has autism, when you combine some of these psychological features, we always say psychological features and issues combined with the online disinhibition effect creates a perfect storm.
Right.
And there's some great new research that talks about, because oftentimes I'm in court at sentencing trying to help a judge understand why this great man who's a leader in his church and his community, who has, a lovely wife and kids, why this man is now before this judge for having looked at child pornography. And some of the latest stuff talks about that, how we're finding that in the online world, you can look at a child in a very horrible, being sexually abused, and it doesn't feel like a real child.
Right.
It's online objectification. Whereas if I took that same individual offline and said, do you think it's okay to sexually abuse children? Would you ever watch that happening? They would be horrified. Like, no, because they can see children in the offline world and they feel real. Mm-hmm. And they feel more connected to them. And you get in the online world and it doesn't feel like that's a real child. Your brain is doing something different with that experience than it would with a child in the offline world.
Well, and that's part of the chaos of the internet. It creates the illusion of reality, and yet it's non-reality.
Exactly.
And so we don't have the capacity to filter that. I even think that, we talked about the anonymity, but there are some times where the internet creates this other reality or universe where a version of me shows up. I want them to know it's my tweet. I want them to know it's my post, but the reality of the internet creates a distance. So I feel more empowered to use my voice in that way. So I want that association, but I don't want it to be like I would never, like you're saying, I would never say that to someone's face in person because I see them as a person. But online, I feel the freedom because there's a disconnection from reality, though it appears to be reality.
David, what's the name of the book? Is it Virtually You?
Right. Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about that piece a minute?
Well, I think, it fits right along with what you're saying, Greg. I think it's about people have certain, personality characteristics and traits, and all of us do, and that what happens is that sometimes we get online, and that online world magnifies some of those traits. So that feeling of anonymity and equity with other people and the ability to kind of be disinhibited and not feel like there are consequences magnifies some of our narcissism. It might bring out our ego more, so that there are aspects to our personality that we may already struggle with that when we get online get magnified. And maybe I think we all have kind of a dark curiosity about sexuality, and that gets magnified online. So these things that we may already struggle with in our own lives to try to be better people, those get kind of squashed, and the negative pieces get magnified online, and it does create this bubble, right? Like you were talking about, kind of this bubble that we feel like we navigate this world in, where we're protected from other people, and we don't realize the impact we have on other people in that world.
Absolutely. One of the things that we talk about at the Men of Valor workshop that we do each month is this idea that the age of the people in the pornography that I'm drawn towards is important. And one of the things that age can do is connect me to a younger version of myself. So if I'm drawn to underage pornography and the people in the pornography are 16 years old, then my 16-year-old self shows up and there's a connection that is created there. The other piece, though, can be I have meanings and messages associated with particular ages, and that's what I'm drawn to. So with this particular age, I associate innocence or naivete or playfulness or adventuresome, someone who's adventurous. And so when I'm looking at the pornography, one of the things I think we encourage the men to ask is, what are my perceptions about the person that I'm viewing, and what part of me is connecting to that?
I often talk about what is the function of the pornography you are looking at,
Right.
Because there's meaning behind it. You may not consciously be aware of it, but we hear a lot of men talk about that same phenomena. Like, I wanted to go back. I wasn't popular, in junior high. And I really struggled, and I wanted to go back and do it differently. And so being drawn to that age group, when I was chatting online,
Right.
I really didn't start out for this to be a sexual experience with this 12-year-old or a sexual chat, but I was trying to redo those parts of myself. Or I, was drawn to the innocence, and I wanted to help that person protect that. Now, oftentimes because of that anonymity, that online disinhibition, it starts to cross those boundaries, because it's like without acute awareness, intentionality, it's really difficult to be in the online world in any aspect of sexuality and not be drawn into it
Right.
and be influenced by it.
And I think that's the importance of getting some help around these issues early, certainly before you get caught and into a legal situation, where you can begin to explore what is it that is the function of this pornography for me. What is it that's drawn me into this aspect of the world? And I think you're right, Elizabeth. Sometimes it is those things. Sometimes it's people's emotions that they're not as in touch with. Right? It's not a conscious decision, but under some exploration in therapy, they realize how angry they were as a 15-year-old when they were bullied in school, and that part of this is to pay back their bullies, so there's just so many different functions of why people find themselves into this, that it's not easy to get to that conclusion without having somebody help you on that journey to figure that out.
Absolutely.
And I will add that there are people who do have sexual interest in children of all ages. And as you said about curiosity, that is something that there is help for. And sometimes I don't want to say to people, well, it's all these other reasons for everybody. It's not about sexual interest in children. For some people it is. And that's as much as it's difficult to carry the secret of pornography addiction. I've seen many 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, 40-year-olds who said, I've known all my life. There's some sexual interest in kids, but I can't talk to, I've never been able to talk about that. So it's that secret that just is so shameful because it's so equated with sex offender or pedophilia, and everybody wants to avoid that label.
Absolutely.
And so to be able to say to people, there is help out there. If you do, whatever reason you have gotten into looking at child pornography, and there are a myriad of reasons, and sometimes they're all interconnected, but there's help even if it's about sexual interest in children.
Absolutely. And one of the things at Faithful and True that we are very clear about is this isn't about labeling ourselves or living in that shame of I'm disgusting, I'm a pervert. Mm-hmm. It's helping them to understand that there is some chaos in them, some wound in them that needs to be healed. And we talk about addiction as a false attempt to heal an old wound.
Exactly.
And so if someone can be open enough to start being honest and owning their choices and then create the vulnerability to experience and expose the old wounds, then there is healing and hope.
Exactly. And I do believe that this is born out of trauma, born out of childhood experiences, born out of not getting those 7 desires of the heart met. Right. And so that there is always hope, but being honest about it is the key. Yeah.
And one final question before we end. So in working in this field for as long as y'all have, are you at a place where within a few minutes of a conversation, you can begin to get clarity around is this curiosity or interest, or is there still a complexity to it that takes some time and investigation, and it just is going to be a while before you get that clarity?
Yeah, I think it is a process of unraveling, and I wish, I think some people would like to say, would like to come into a session and say at the end of that first 50 minutes, what am I? Who am I? What am I? And I just think that it takes a lot more exploration. It's taken people many times 20, 30, 40 years to get to that place. I don't think it's going to be an easy thing to unravel. And again, we don't want to apply labels that aren't helpful to people in their understanding. So I do think it's a little more complex than just in that few minutes gut reaction kind of thing.
And sometimes there are people who come in and they're so desperate for help, they just they're ready to tell you their story if they feel like it's a safe place and that they can be honest because they're so burdened with their story. So I would say yes to your question. It is both, but oftentimes it's clear when people come in and are just so ready for help.
Absolutely. And so,
and I just want to add one more thing here before we end, if I can, since we're talking about kind of entering into the counseling process, it is important for listeners to know that some states do have mandated reporting requirements. And so while we really do want people to seek help for their struggles, it's important to know, what your rights and what the responsibilities are of the counselor that you're seeking. If you're in a state like Pennsylvania, for example, and you talk to me about viewing child pornography, technically I'm mandated to report that. So it's good to have conversations about your own safety with your counselor, maybe before you begin sharing your story, so that you know what risks you're taking and it can be a little more calculated on your part.
Absolutely. We often say that truth may have consequences, and truth always creates freedom. Well, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, Elizabeth and David, thank you very much. This strikes me as a subject matter that is going to deserve to be more than one podcast.
I think so.
I think we'd like to have Elizabeth and David back on the Faithful and True podcast with us very soon. This is really interesting, and I know that we've got a lot of listeners out there that it's probably pretty eye-opening to them, and at the same time rather reassuring as you tell them how many times it can be natural in someone's early years trauma and that type of thing. So we'd like to have you back on very soon.
I'd love that.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank everybody for watching our YouTube presentation of the Faithful and True podcast today. If you like what you see, we would really appreciate you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you won't miss a show. And give this video a thumbs up. We'd appreciate that. That helps us spread the word. And if this video has been helpful to you, feel free to share it with a friend you might have or a family member who might also benefit from this message. This video or this podcast also is available everywhere that you find podcasts, everywhere from the Faithful and True website to iHeartRadio to Apple to iTunes. So if you're listening to the audio version, again, we invite you to post a review, if you will, like it. We'd really appreciate that. It helps us to spread the word. Here at Faithful and True, we do much more than just the podcast. We are here to help individuals, couples, and as Greg mentioned earlier, every month we do the Men of Valor 3-day intensive workshop. Because of COVID-19, we're currently offering that as a virtual workshop by way of Zoom technology. We want to reassure you that we use the highest professional level of Zoom, which is encrypted and very secure and safe. So if you find yourself struggling with any sexual purity issues, we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com. Click on the workshop pages where you'll find not only great information, but Greg offers some very helpful videos there where he and Chris Hardesty, one of our other counselors, answer the most frequently asked questions that men have about the workshop. And we're posting another one. One of our first video podcasts was with Dr. Rick Underwood. And Rick did his entire Ph.D. dissertation on the effectiveness of the Men of Valor workshop. And what he found is a great message for men out there, is that the workshop has resulted in a measurable reduction in shame and guilt. And if we can help you in any possible way, we invite you to reach out to us. So until next time, we thank Dr. Greg Miller, our host. We thank Elizabeth Hardesty. I'm sorry. We have two Elizabeths here. Elizabeth Griffin and David Delmonico for joining us today. We hope that this coming week for you will be a week of many blessings and great vision.